Well, my excuse is I'm getting old and my fingers twitch in different ways.
Yeah, so that's like, I wonder if someone did that a lot, like was recovering from a stroke or something, and you know that there's been a lot of work with reading on rhythm, you know, and the rhythm of when to make the double letter when you're typing with your fingers. It's a percussion question, you know. I really miss oh darn, help me, music Emma.
Well, music,
scientist.
yeah, that's Marge, but that she didn't
Marge,
actually,
I miss Marge.
she didn't actually do Emma. She just did a miscue study, a musical miscue study. But actually, what's really funny because one of the prompts for today was, you know, what future directions could Emma go in, and I was thinking, yes, okay, somebody could do something with musical Emma. Because as I said, Marge did the miscue part, but yeah.
Well, then tell them I want to be on their committee because I like morphology, and there's this double the letter morpheme floating around in that writing, and that's where there would be a high incidence of miscues, you know, because it's like there's something else besides just spelling the word.
Hello, Ryan, welcome. David, hello, welcome as well. We have also two other attendees. Chanwu, welcome. Narjas, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Welcome.
Oh, Alan Flurkey. Hello, Alan Flurkey.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Alan, you look like you're at the New York Public Library.
I was going to say,
Exactly where I am. Ryan, it looks like you're at the New York Public Library.
I'm floating in the ceiling like Ghostbusters.
I'm on the other side. I'll walk over to you.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh my God, look at you. You're up on the ceiling. Oh my God, what did you have to eat?
Are you a Marvel character?
Yeah, it was
a Marvel superhero.
You must have gotten something to eat from Whole Foods that's allowing you to float like that.
Undoubtedly, that was what it was. That was what it was.
Always a backdrop that
Ryan was here last weekend helping us do some data analysis. And we Skyped on the second half of Saturday. We went into the city and cruised around to the New York Public Library, which is what academics might do. And so we went inside the Rose Room, which is really cool. If you've never been to that's the famous big open room in the public library. So that was fun. And we didn't get kicked out.
No. No, we did not. It was not for lack of trying, though.
Yeah, right.
To say, sounds like you didn't try hard enough.
Peter, what time is it where you at?
Sorry, it's now 7 p.m.
all right. It's just like, well, we're gonna go and
Coming up on 11 for you folks, right?
yes, 11
Not
o'clock.
everybody.
Yeah, so maybe while we are waiting, welcome everyone. So I know that we are familiar faces, but we also have new attendees as well. So really welcome. So my co-facilitator here and our Zoom host is Alan. So he is actually also going to record this session today.
Right.
And Alan is from Hofstra University in New York, for those of you who don't know him. And yeah.
As are two of my colleagues here on this call, Dave Schultz and Lori Rosendale.
There you go. And I am Perpi Liwanag from Towson University here in Maryland. So although we do have a small group here, maybe we can just go ahead and I was going to go ask people to type in the chat box, introduce themselves. But since we have a small group, maybe we can go ahead and continue with that very quickly.
Recording in progress.
Oh,
Would you like me to start?
yes, please go ahead.
Okay?
Right.
So I'm Ryan Nelson at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I'm a speech pathologist by training. Got one of my doctoral students, Nargis, is here. And I would say her last name, but I always get it wrong. In addition to mispronouncing her first name, which is pathetic as a speech pathologist, I should be better at this. But Nargis has joined us today. And I told her that she didn't have to worry if her webcam wasn't working right. So she could just get in, hopefully, here and see. And then Charlotte Clark is assistant professor at Wisconsin Eau Claire. She's written with us as well. Oh, there you are, Charlotte. I didn't know if you were going to be able to introduce yourself, but Charlotte's done some work with me in our lab quite a bit as a doc student, and we've collaborated on a number of different projects relating to literacy, a little bit with eye tracking as well.
Great. Peter, want to go next?
I'm Peter Duckett. I work at a bilingual K-12 Arabic English school, which is a national school in the Kingdom of Bahrain in the Arabian Gulf. I'm entering my 10th year in this position. Prior to that, I worked as a curriculum person at Cairo American College in Cairo, Egypt, which was an international school, and the composition of the audience is a little different.
Are you gonna go?
Lois.
I don't know.
Go ahead. Peter was finishing. Go ahead. Did you all, Peter?
Yeah, I think I'm finished.
Okay.
You can talk a little bit more about stuff when I'm actually talking.
Okay. And then we also have David Schultz. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm finally retired, really retired. I retired from the classroom about 14 years ago, and then finally from Long Island University this past fall. I'm enjoying mentoring a brilliant person who's taken over my spot. Bonnie Downs, who's quite well known on the island. But anyway, I'm looking forward to this. I love this. There's so much that's connected to things I want to learn more about the Emma stuff, and I encouraged her class to join us. I don't know if they will. Saturday morning's a tough time, especially when you're taking classes. So I congratulate anybody here who's a student and also taking on this extra bit. Anyway, thank you. Good to see everybody's faces. You all look great.
Welcome. So we also have in my screen Kathy O'Brien. Go ahead.
Morning. Good day. Good evening. I know you all from Emma at the main lab in Tucson, from which I did my PhD and in multilingual reading in English, French, and Spanish. And since then, I have been a wanderer and have currently, since COVID, resettled in Tucson, Arizona.
Thank you, Kathy. I also see on my screen Lois Bridges. Go ahead. We are actually introducing ourselves. We are actually muted.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to this. I'm also retired last January from Scholastic, and the very next day took over as executive director of a nonprofit. And I've never worked so hard in my life. I didn't realize what I was getting into, but I love it. It's all mission driven. And anyway, I'm very grateful for the CEL community. It's my my intellectual touchstone and keeps me sane. So thank you so much for hosting this. I'm really looking forward to the research.
Great. Welcome. So we do have three more. Chanwoo Chang, I think is also new to the session. Do you want to go introduce yourself? I think you're muted. Maybe we can come back a little bit later. Dawn, Dawn Daniela? I'm not see. Oh, did we just miss Dawn? I think. And
Oh, there's Yetta.
okay, maybe we can go back to Dawn a little bit later. Yetta, hello, Yetta. We are introducing ourselves. Do you want to say something? Well, Yetta, you're muted.
I think is that better?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Yetta. And then Kim Chin Wang, yes, I'm not sure if I said that right, introduced herself in the chat box. So welcome. She's a PhD student from the University of South Carolina. So we do have Peter Duckett and Ryan Nelson here going to talk to us about their work. Although we did ask them to share some ideas, and I'm going to put that in our chat box today. I will let them go ahead and answer the responses in any way they would like and present their ideas with Emma. So I'm going to post the 3 questions that we asked them to share, and then we'll go ahead and get started with Peter. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think before I even talk a little bit about the first question, which is how do you see Emma moving forward in my work and my current plans, I need to talk a little bit about my current context for work. So as I mentioned, I'm working at a national bilingual school. It's a K-12 school, Arabic and English. Most of our students are Bahraini nationals, although we have a few who are either Saudi or Egyptian. I think that's pretty much it. My role at the school is I'm the coordinator of curriculum and professional learning. So I spend a lot of time focused on professional learning, and that's to some extent where things related to this Emma group and other things that I've been associated with in relation to my studies at the University of Arizona come in play. In terms of my work moving forward with Emma, basically, because I don't have an eye tracker, I would need to be collaborating with other people. And I have done some work with Kumi and various other people. The thing that has kind of impacted anything in that nature has been the COVID pandemic. So it's not been easy to move around. Essentially, I was here in Bahrain for 18 months. Didn't plan on that. None of us planned on any of it. But I do use aspects of Emma in relation to my work. A lot of times people are asking me for suggestions in relation to professional development, and in some cases they're going in directions that I kind of think are a little off the beaten track. And I also, through a regional organization, frequently have things that are sent our way that involve things related to literacy and reading. What I find interesting is that I keep in mind basically 3 things that I use as a filter when I'm listening to people talk about reading, and particularly early reading, and which has been the focus of my dissertation. And that is, how do the deaf learn to read? I think about dialect, and I also think about what we know just from eye movement studies, but also from Emma. And in a lot of cases, what I find problematic with a lot of what people are talking about is they're definitely operating from the concept of reading as being automatic, accurate word recognition. And there's a lot of data that we have that essentially does not jibe with that view. I do have colleagues that I'm working with who are devotees of science of reading, so I'm in constant dialogue in relation to those sorts of things. I have Orton Gillingham devotees that I work with. While one might think that I'm physically far removed from a lot of the things that you guys deal with daily, I'm not physically far removed from them at all. Anyway, so one of the things that I find is particularly challenging is the Arabic programs in the school, because the Arabic programs are really very much, kind of operating from very traditional perspectives, a lot of it even back to the point of memorization, which is what some early forms of literacy and memorizing, like surahs from the Quran and things like that. There are aspects of it that are very letter oriented. There are belief systems that the children cannot begin to do anything with reading or writing until sometime mostly around second grade, which I find kind of very surprising and shocking. And I guess the other thing I will say is that I'm, in relation to other things that I'm doing, focusing on eye movement, I'm trying to continue to read eye movement studies. Mostly it's eye movement studies that I do have access to. What I'm finding really problematic is everything seems to be word focused. I see Yetta nodding her head. I keep going back to Huey and Huey's, I guess what I want to say, perspective, that is essentially looking at things, looking at text, I guess I will say, from multiple strata. And I find it so odd that the eye movement people cannot get away from the wordness of things, or being bound by word as a construct. And what is interesting is I actually was thinking about this today. I remember when I was doing my dissertation, that was a conversation that Ken and I, Peter Fries, and I don't remember who else was in the room, could have been Eric, had about the way in which I was treating the data that I had. And that was that I was referencing the idea of where students were fixating as being referencing words, which again, technically means I was already beginning to bend the data to conform with kind of standard eye movement study, which I've been sitting here thinking about this recently and kind of feeling a little uncomfortable about it. Anyway, so those are things that I'm kind of interested in. I just finished reading an article. It involved Rayner and several other people, and they were looking at the idea of, where does the eye go at the end of sentences? And they're looking at the idea of identifying a word, and then there's lexical and syntactic wrap up, and then they jump to the next sentence. And I'm thinking to myself, that doesn't make sense. It's just odd that somehow the lexical and syntactic aspects are only occurring at the end of the sentence, at the end of viewing a word. And I just find the whole, what's the word I want to say? I'm going to put it this way: slavish devotion to the concept of word is just really mind-boggling to me. And I just keep asking myself, have they considered anything other than that? And I don't see that they do. So this is one thing that I'm kind of extremely interested in, and I keep reading, I keep looking for eye movement articles in particular. I don't think I'm going to meet with much success, but I am looking in hopes that I'm going to see something that suggests that maybe there are aspects of what they're looking at that, if viewed from a different perspective, would be informative. I'm just not finding anything.
Yes, great. Thanks, Peter. So I know you mentioned a lot of those ideas in terms of your line of work. So we'll go ahead with Brian to also address this first question there.
So, Peter, I'm so glad you brought up that last part about your frustration with the word and the inability to move from it. Man, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago. We were at an Emma meeting in Hofstra, and I don't remember the context. It was either we were sitting in the little cafe, you and I, or it was in a meeting, and you made the point that when we're coding eye movement, that it's, there's no such thing really as regressions. It's all cognitive progressions, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
And that's the whole gist of why this word stuff doesn't work, because it ignores the cognitive progression that we're constantly constructing and moving forward. And as you were talking, I was reminded of this piece. I'm reading this collection of stuff about Gregory Bateson, and Ray Birdwhistle has this part where he says that an ethnographer searches for research tools that will implement whatever it is that he's interested in, the situations. And then he says, the research situation and the tools are developed with the full recognition that they must be explicitly relevant to the methodology inherent in the questions and in its exploration. In his insistence on methodology as theory and theory as methodology, Bateson influenced many people's work because he recognized that the theory that we approach our questions with are really what makes our decisions about the methodology that we're going to use. And so your methodology is a form of theory. And I think that's what makes miscue analysis so powerful, is because it is a theoretical stance that, as well as a methodology, that allows us to ask the questions that I think people that care about other people want to know. And so it's that has been kind of the underlying impetus for the work that I've done in eye movement miscue analysis. And I've become increasingly interested in the role of background knowledge and the power of that. And that so much of our, in speech pathology, we see these individuals who struggle, and so much of it is the background knowledge and their difficulty with marshaling the background knowledge, or that they just haven't had the background knowledge, and people have expected them to have that. And so as a consequence, the mismatch translates into what ends up being labeled as impairment down the road. Or if there's an inconsistency with their background knowledge and the expectations that people put for them, we see that mismatch, and so then they become a child with language learning impairment or disability of some type, because they don't meet the needs or the demands of the specific context. So with regards to the questions of how do I see Emma moving forward in my own work, I'm going to ask for a little bit of an indulgence here, if you'll give me just a few minutes to go in not necessarily reading, but in an area that is reading, but it's just a little different type of reading. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen or not, but so that's not the piece I want to do. I hope I can.
Yeah, I think you should be able to. Alan,
I should be able to? Okay, let's try this. So one of the areas that I really don't find very interesting in my field of is speech pathology is swallowing. We deal with when folks have had a stroke or some type of neurological incident. We do these radiographic swallow studies where we lace food with some metal, barium, and then we say, here, drink this, and let's watch and see if you're okay if you're safe to eat. And so here's an example of what a speech pathologist has to read in a medical setting. And so in this image here, this is a lateral view of some poor individual that's got a mouth full of barium-laced thickened liquid, and it's going to come out of the mouth, and it's supposed to go down here and out into the. And when we watch this, we're looking specifically to see if any of this stuff goes into the airway, which is right here. Now, at the base of the tongue, we have the epiglottis that sticks up, and this is a little vallecular space. Sometimes catches some food or some of this stuff, and that can be problematic. What's interesting to us is that when I play this, we see that there's this moment in time where right here, this little split second, this is where we see the flash of the bad stuff going into the lungs that can lead to aspiration pneumonia. This stuff up here is problematic. This person has some other pathophysiology going on that's causing them to have some they call this retrograde flow that comes up into the nasal cavity, and it's just a really horrific kind of sensation, and they're going to end up coughing here in just a bit. You'll see them, oh, it's not going down so well, and they turn their head and they cough, and it's a very difficult swallow. And so we'd say, man, we probably shouldn't have you eat anything right now. It's not safe for you to do that. Well, we were doing some eye tracking of students learning how to read these studies. I'm not really sure why I started doing that. Somebody probably asked the question. I read a paper on that novice radiologists, they look and inspect differently the MRIs than expert people. They're not as efficient, and they miss some things, even though the more expert radiologists may not even fixate on certain things. They figure out how to catch it. Well, in this study that we've done, where we took some students that didn't know anything about these swallow studies at the beginning of the course, and we tracked their eyes, and we compared it to what they did at the end, we found some really interesting things that I think have real direct application. And in a paper that we're working on, we're finishing up writing this study of the eye tracking and reading these video fluoroscopic swallow studies. But one of the things that we found is that there are moments of interest that arise where eye tracking can really give us some insight. And if you have the right theory, it makes a huge difference in the insights that you're able to get. Bruner said that in his book In Search of Mind, that an event is informative in the degree that it permits somebody to decide among a set of alternative possibilities as to what it might have been. And so the idea is I'm looking at something, and if that input is informative to me, it's because it gives me insight into a set of possibilities. Well, heck, that's miscue analysis that allows us to look at that, right? And it fits so well. And so what we found with this, looking at these swallow studies, is that it's really important that we look at the specific temporal alignment of the fixations with what the mind is doing, what the reader is doing, what the reader of the X-ray is doing. See, and the temporal alignment, because there's this moment as the food goes down, out of the oral cavity into the pharyngeal cavity, and that there's this time when it passes the airway, that's where the money is at. And if you aren't looking at the right place at the right time, you miss it. That has really been instructive to me, because as we wanted to know how do readers make sense of print, there's something about the timing of it. Comprehension is such a difficult thing to look at because it's a process that's not outward. the closest I think we can get to is looking at the miscue. And so this has impressed upon me the need to look at the next positioning of miscues in conjunction with, or of eye movements in conjunction with the miscues. See, the miscue to me is the outward manifestation that there was a mismatch in the expected response, that the reader was anticipating. There's some mismatch, not bad or good, just a mismatch. And their eyes can reveal how that process was sorted out. And as a demonstration, we published a paper with Alan and several colleagues looking at flow and oral reading fluency. And the last piece I'll share might be this little piece here with, and it just resonates with me, this notion of how one marshals their background knowledge to make sense in the moment. Let me see if I can make this. So here's this kid reading, happens to be my own child.
Okay, Star Wars Rebel Force. Chapter 1. The moon was dead. A film of red dust lay over the cratered land.
He finished the sentence, but he wasn't finished with the sentence. We see the regression or the moving back because this cratered land is really a cratered land, and that miscue threw him a little bit. But he doesn't go back at all. He said cratered land.
Nothing disturbed.
And he moves forward because he's figured out that that doesn't matter, whatever it is, his rationale may have been. But if I want to understand that miscue, I need to be able to, and I really want to get it, how was this fella making sense of it? What level of awareness did he have? Being able to see that, no, there was a pause. He went back and checked on it. He checked with where he was at. The use of the next positioning, from using the term from conversation analysis, to me that allows me to kind of see how this comprehension process is unfolding. And that's really important. The last thing that I think eye movement miscue analysis has really, and these two kinds of studies that I've referenced, has informed us. We found with the student that was looking at, with these students that didn't know what they were doing when they looked at these swallow studies, they would come in, and we found that they all had a plan. They all had something that they thought, and it, if I can try to make sense of this a little bit, we had several students that would come in, and they knew that the airway was important. They had assumptions about the text, assumptions about this text that is a radiograph. They knew we don't want anything in the airway. That's a problem. And so they'd come in, and we'd have these students that say, I just didn't want to miss anything going in the airway. So they would sit there and they would look. But the problem was the knowledge and skills that they had when they had learned anatomy and physiology out of a context. It was artificial. They memorized bones and joints and processes. And they'd come in and they'd stare right here. They'd think, boy, this is it. And they'd stare right at the base of the tongue. But the airway was way down here. And so they applied their knowledge inaccurately. They applied their knowledge and skills in a way that was inefficient, and it wasn't sufficient. And it's shown us that in the teaching, there's a need for teaching authentic, real-time concepts, even with college students. If you don't do that, when we move away from really doing stuff, the purpose that we're after, enjoying the story, making sense, that a person's background knowledge can be employed, and it's just employed wrong. It's employed in a way that doesn't get it done for them. And so for us, it's helped kind of consolidate this notion that background knowledge really matters, but it's got to be mediated within a real context. And so this spending time on words or sentences void of context doesn't help. And if I want to understand how the person's really working through this, I've got to be able to look at the next positioning. I think that's been the takeaway for our, my colleagues and I's work. And I hope that Emma will move more towards looking at the real strengths that the readers come, how they marshal their background knowledge. That's what I'm hoping we can kind of move towards as a group.
Okay. I know Ryan already went through discussing the research that he's already done. So we'll go ahead and also listen to Peter. Continue on with that line, second question there.
So which question are we on now here?
We are discussing, what about literacy based on your work, what we know about literacy based on your work.
Okay. Well, it's funny because, I did my dissertation 20 years ago, and I was saying to Perpy when I first came on, I said was kind of like gobsmacked because I suddenly realized that my readers are like 26, 27 years old now. And to me, that was like a shock. Anyway, and then I kind of went back and I was thinking to myself, well, what kinds of things from the study that I did were informative and maybe are still somewhat informative. And I think one gross general comment I made was that basically my 6-year-old readers in my study, they weren't so horribly different than adult readers. There were differences, but to a large extent, the kids knew what the job was, as it were, and they had a variety of strategies. They employed those strategies. They weren't always effective. They weren't always efficient either. But what comes back to me every time I look, for example, at the video clip with Javier, is just how multi-strategic he is. And that if you're looking at the variety of strategies he employs through the reading of the entire text, he displays a huge range of strategies, which I think is really quite interesting. The other thing that I think was also of interest to me was this idea that just because the voice is silent doesn't mean that the brain is not functional, because we saw that when the voice was silent, the eye was being directed all over the place. So obviously there was brain activity going on, because otherwise the eye wouldn't have been moved. So to me, that was also of interest. I think it's also interesting that there are people, some of my colleagues, who still believe that kids spend way too much time in the pictures. And my study showed that the kids knew that the bulk of their work was in the print, and that's where they spent the bulk of their time. To be honest with you, I haven't gone back to look at what exactly proportionally that was, but I think it's like 30% of their time was in pictures and 70-something% of their time was in print. And the other thing I thought was really interesting is kids were very adept at their use of pictures, because there are previous eye movement studies that basically point to the idea that the areas of complexity in pictures are usually the areas where you're going to get the most information. So, for example, if you're looking at a map and there's a coastline, and it's just a straight coastline, versus an area where there's a port and there's, like a puckering of the, or scrunching up of the coastline, that's the place that's going to give you the most information. That's where you need to spend most of your time, because you can summarize the other areas rather quickly. So to me, that was also of interest. I think also the other things I thought were of interest was that, you know, essentially the kids did things that the adult readers do, which is they spent more time looking at content words. They didn't fixate all the words. They didn't fixate print sequentially, horizontally. They looked at it in different ways, horizontally and vertically. They exhibited regressions, and their regressions were relatively proportional to what adult readers do. They exhibited eye voice span. Anyway, I just thought most of those things were of interest. The one thing that I still am really very interested in is that the readers in my study produced orally 100% of the words they did not fixate, which to me was a point of fascination. And I'm convinced that that's because, as beginning readers, they knew with 100% certainty that those things were there and they didn't need to look, and they knew it with 100% certainty. And that I'm convinced that with older readers, that statistic is going to be different. And the reason why I theorize that, although I haven't been able to use anybody else's data to go looking at that, is because I think older readers are more capable of fixing things should things prove to be less than functional, that they have fixing strategies. And I think that maybe my beginning readers were maybe not as confident in those sorts of things, but they were confident in knowing that thing is there. The brain is basically saying, you don't need to look there. That's something that I'm theorizing, and as I say, I haven't had the opportunity to go looking at anybody else's data from studies. I think for me, those were things that were of interest within my study. I think about it in relation to other people's studies as well, and at the time I was doing my study, Eric and Anne were the two people that were also doing eye movement studies. And so I spent probably more time talking to Eric about some of the things that I was looking at than maybe Anne. But in any case, it was interesting to me to see that essentially my beginning readers behaved in very, very similar ways to adult readers or older, more experienced readers, let's put it that way. And what I also found interesting was, even in conversation with kids who had been cued to the idea that they weren't supposed to look at pictures or looking at pictures was bad, they did it. They did it, but they denied vehemently that they ever looked at the pictures, which I'm remembering one student in particular, Corey, who said, no, I never looked at the pictures. But I think he was also kind of socialized to that by his teacher. Don't look at the pictures. So that was interesting to me to see. So I'll stop.
Great. I mean, those are really good up until now in terms of the research that we're seeing with where students are looking at. And it makes sense with what you said. They already know what they were looking at, so they focus on the task on hand. So I'm looking at the time, it's 11:40. We can go ahead with the final question that you have, that we have there, that you might want to give us your insights, Ryan, first, and then we'll end with Peter, and then we'll open it up to group for question. So what else do you think we still need to work on in Emma research? I know Ryan was already beginning to talk about this, but do you want to go ahead, Ryan, and start with that?
But I'd like to ask Peter if when they, in your study, when they were looking at the pictures, were they going to where the action was? I mean, you talked about it as, I think you said it was the more complex parts of the picture. I'm wondering if they went to where the action kind of was, and I
Yeah,
find
although some of the images were not exactly what you call action
right,
oriented,
right.
They went to the places where either a character was interacting with something, or implication was that there was an interaction occurring, something like that. Yes.
Just about all of the instances where we've looked at kids' use of pictures, it seems that, and we've done this kind of clinically in looking at how kids negotiate, not necessarily papers we've published, but things we've used clinically where we were playing around with the eye tracking. It seems like they always go to something, I guess by action, I mean the areas that are going to help them out. They're going to make sense of what they're reading about, potentially be informative. And they don't go over here to this other part of the picture that doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. If they do, they don't stay there very long. I remember that from your paper. I find that really interesting. I think, Emma, again, I said, I think we need to really work on, or I'd like to see us work on next positioning. I'd like to see us also, I don't know that I have the skill set to do it, but I'm hopeful that at some point, someone with the theoretical view of learning that would cause them to join this group and at least be friendly towards us here, that they'll go back and look at what a fixation is, that they'll go back and look at what counts. I remember talking with Ken a few years ago about the idea that there's something that's going on during the moments of what we're calling moments of saccade, where there's insight being given to the brain. I don't think it's shut off in the way that, even if it's not letter identification, because the original studies of of eye movement, where that a fixation was determined as being a fixation if it was long enough to differentiate randomly presented words or letters. And so when you know what's going on, because it's a story that makes sense, maybe the gaze trail is a better indication of what's going on. I think Perpy's done some of that work, and I'd like to see us kind of tease out some of those old studies and say, well, what if we start from a different frame and redo? I think Alan's talked about redoing the Dodge studies, where we look at just what counts as identification of fixation. Because I think that conceptually we're a little bit off on what counts as fixations, because we've just adopted the what folks have called it. That's something that I'd like to see move towards. But it's got to be people that understand real reading, I think. Otherwise, they're just going to end up.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, and I think we will, after Peter also shares his ideas, we're also going to go and let you know. Ken Goodman did write a chapter for us in this one that I think would help us think about ways where we can move forward. So Peter,
Great.
go ahead.
Sorry, I'm muted. I forgot I was muted. I think there's some interesting things that Emma can obviously build off some of the kind of well-established Emma studies. So involving things like texts like Man Who Kept House. The ones that I'm thinking of are things like the one that has to do with like Petoskey's Boat in the Basement, all of those things, plus the idea of looking at things associated with Rema. And then the other thing I thought was, I was thinking is like, I hearkened back to alternative semiotic systems. So I started to think about Marge again, and Marge and Ock's study, which was a musical miscue analysis study, because I think there are aspects of that might prove of interest as well. The other comment I want to make is that I've been spending more and more time thinking about a book that Joel Brown cued me to when I was doing my dissertation, and it's called Beyond Reductionism, the Altbach Symposium of 1968. And in it, various people are talking. One of the people who presents a talk is Ludwig von Bertalanffy, who was known as the father of general systems theory and general systems dynamics. Arthur Koestler was there as well. He did a paper talking about a holon, which is simultaneously a part and a whole. And so I've spent time thinking about a variety of things. I got really interested in von Bertalanffy's general systems dynamics. And because of that, plus my studies with Ken and Yetta, I actually at one point developed a visual representation of what I was seeing as being a model of reading that conforms to general systems dynamics. And what I find interesting is it's similar to, but different from, the rope view that Nell Duke and company just published in, except mine's a little different. And actually it links to what Ryan's talking about with background knowledge and things of that nature. And I was looking at it from the standpoint of like, what are all of the nested influences that are in play, particularly either as a reader is reading silently or as a reader is reading aloud. And the visual representation looks like some sort of psionic model, generator or something, but I still have it somewhere. I'm not sure where. And it's just something I keep coming back to and thinking about and tinkering with. Haven't really, well, I did actually write a little bit about it, but it's just something that I keep coming back to because I'm, again, thinking about what I know from Emma, the Emma studies, and also just a variety of things that I've gotten interested in. And I'm seeing Debbie sitting in the back behind Yetta and thinking about the thing that Yetta cued me to ages ago, where she said to me that every text was predictable. And my first response when I went away was like, what the hell does she mean? And I was like, I was flummoxed and I was also irritated. And then I spent the next 7 years figuring out what she could possibly have meant. And to me, that also informs this model that I've kind of played around with. Anyway, again, to me, I think there are all kinds of different directions we can go in. Again, obviously there are possibility for Emma studies across just about any language. I'm not even sure now how many different languages Emma studies have been conducted in, but I also think that certain aspects of that, the applicability of that across multiple languages also kind of, and particularly non-alphabetic languages, in a lot of ways, kind of calls into question some of the aspects of the things that people are on about in relation to science of reading or the simple view of reading. And I just think they're hugely important to be doing. So all of those things I think are possibilities. And again, I haven't even really thought in great detail, but I'm thinking any sort of alternative semiotic system, I mean, right down to what Ryan was just talking about with X-rays and viewing of X-rays. Actually, when you were talking about that, Ryan, it made me think, oh, we're going full circle, because when Eric was first doing his studies, he went to a medical portion of the U of A, and he was learning how to use an eye tracker with people that were doing stuff with radiology, if I remember correctly. That's true, isn't it, Yetta? Yetta, you're muted. Okay, so anyway, I'll shut up.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, when we're looking at the time, we have 10 minutes. I think we can open the floor to any conversation or comment. I know Ryan wrote there. If Peter, can you share the titles that you just referenced? I think that would help us. Any comments, questions to Peter or Ryan? Feel free to just unmute. Debbie.
I maybe I'll write a note to the group and send you an example that I have. But I've thought a lot. My focus has always been more pedagogy and curriculum than reading necessarily. And I thought a lot about, this issue of background knowledge and kind of problematizing background knowledge. I have an example that I use a lot, so I'll send that to you, of a student of mine who at the beginning of the year said she didn't know a lot about her own culture, and at the end of the year said she knew a lot about her own culture. But the experiences that she shared happened before she came to 5th grade. And so the issue is that experience or perception, Brooks Smith had a sense of learning being a cycle of perceiving, ideating, and presenting. And he said that the teacher comes into the ideating part of it. That's the role of the teacher. In other words, helping kids to organize experience into knowledge. And so that unlike Bloom's taxonomy, where knowledge is like the basic thing, actually, if you think of knowledge as the application or the transfer, as Camborne talks about, then what you have are all these perceptions in the learning cycle, just like in the reading cycle. You have perceptions and experiences, and then the learner organizes them into knowledge in various ways. And that's where kind of multimodality comes in too, because even before anybody used the term multimodality, or I remember the term, we were talking about using different sign systems as part of the ideating process. So ideating would be thinking, reading, writing, talking, dancing, expression, all kinds of ways of organizing experiences. And so thinking of experience rather than background knowledge, Kathy Short and others, of course, by the way, let me say that, Brooks was a teacher of Carol Burks and my mom's and people like that. He was one of the authors of Language and Thinking. And so if you look at Harsty and Burks' increase cycle, you'll see that perceiving, ideating, presenting kind of cycle going on there, a little more complexity. And Kathy Short, Kathy Short has talked a lot about not just starting with background knowledge with the KWL, thing, but starting with this kind of wondering and rondering. In other words, starting with enriching kids' experiences. And if you think about your kids, Ryan, coming in without a lot of background knowledge, for reading, they're not going to get that from reading. They're going to get that from some sort of first-hand experience, or at least second-hand experience of the simulated type of, observation, right? And that's the kind of thing they have to bring to reading about something conceptually. Anyway, I'll send you the Patrice's examples, because I always use them at the beginning of a pedagogy course.
Please do, that'd be great. That'd be great, please.
Thank you, yes. Go ahead, Yetta.
Everything, I'm loving everything I'm hearing, of course, and excited about everything that you're saying. I also have been, I'm not doing any research in any exact way, although I've collected some data that I'm going to try to actually begin to work on more specifically. But the thing that I've become more and more convinced about is the power of the brain itself. I've been reading about the brain and how the brain works, and a lot of the brain people really describe issues like perceiving, ideating, and becoming in that. But the other piece that I haven't heard a lot about, and I think Peter mentioned it once, I think the most powerful part of the reading process is the predicting aspect of it. And prediction is going on all, and you can finish my sentence, because you, in transacting with me, and that's what we do when we read. We finish our sentences. We don't read the ends of sentences, I don't think. And that's something we could look more closely at. But I'm convinced, working with Debbie's great grandchild, my great grandbaby, I had the marvelous experience of reading to her. What's the name of the? I forget names all the time. The little bear that goes to the soup. That goes to the department store. Corduroy. I read her a whole part of Corduroy, and she does not read print particularly. I think she's paying attention to it, and I was reading it to her, and when I read with kids anyway, I just sort of stop at a particular where I know it's going to be the end of a sentence or where the next phrase is so obvious. And sure enough, even 3-year-olds, and that's how old Michaela was when I was just about 6 months ago, I guess, I read with her. And what amazed me was not only her ability to predict, but her ability to predict exactly what was in the book itself. And she was following me while I was reading, but she didn't point to anything. I wasn't pointing to anything. And I just feel that we need to look more and more about this concept of predicting. And when you have a brain like mine that's not operating the way it always should, I am aware of how much I'm planning what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to operate. And certainly we're doing, I mean, if you read a lot to kids, you know that you're doing it and that you make miscues when you're reading and you just leave them alone because you've made such a wonderful sentence. Why should you go back and use the author's language? Your language was even better. So I think the concept of predicting, and you're all close, I mean, you can only use the word once in your presentations. And I guess it's in the ideating of perceiving, ideating, and coming. What's the last one? Was becoming? Presenting. Yeah. So it's not in the presenting phase, because Crowley's phrase, I believe, is presenting to others. The ideating phase is when you're presenting to yourself. And when you're predicting what's going to happen in your conversation or in your reading or in your relationship with the world or whatever.
Thank you, Yetta. So I think we're looking at the time as well here. I think this was really another, it was meaningful for me. I hope it was meaningful for all of you in terms of what we are learning. I'm hearing perhaps in our future sessions, we can look into theory as a way to help us better understand what we are looking at when we do Emma research. And also the other thing that I'm seeing from what Ryan and Peter also said is the idea of looking at our own data. I mean, in terms of talking about the data that we have. So too, perhaps you have other ideas as well. Please let us know. So we do have 2 announcements. I know Alan would also like to ask something as well. And then I do have one to talk about in terms of sharing with you the good news in terms of the book. A lot of you are authors also of our book on eye movement miscue. We just got the information from our publisher that it's already being printed. Yay! So as soon as that is out, we will let you know. I'll share very quickly a screen in terms of what our cover looks like. So it's going to be here, something like this, but it's coming soon. But that's the good news. Alan, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so maybe we can save this for another time, but here's just something to just kick out there. We have a new president at Hofstra University and a new interim provost and a new dean. And so that's very exciting for us. And one of the thrusts of the president's and provost's new mission is research. Those of us that have ASL equipment know that the ASL is no longer functioning and so it can't be serviced. So my question is this: if you had to purchase new equipment, what would you purchase? And I kind of need that as as a guide for me, because I know that people are using SR and Toby units, and I was wondering how they're satisfied. I know that Ryan has equipment, Perpy, you do, and Yang does, and I was just wondering what their thoughts are currently, because I'm in the market.
Yeah, I know. We put that in our chapter in terms of possible
Good.
equipment. So I'll send you some information there as well, because I know in Australia, Jessica and Lisa are also using a different machine, and I'm not. Let me go and look at the name of the machine so I can send the correct one to you as well.
Perpy,
Yeah.
at one point we had a listing on the Emma Forum website about all the sites and the equipment they're using. Is that still around?
No, but let me go look, find that the list of what everybody has, and then I'll
We
share
got it
that
somewhere.
with you as well.
Yeah, we got it somewhere. I'm just
Somewhere,
kind of curious
yes.
because because I'd like to get
Yeah.
like I said, I'd like to
Yeah, and-
update what we've got going at our lab.
Newer ones too, and I know even if you're able to do that, not just a desktop, but get some mobile eye. I think that one is more convenient. Yang, go ahead. You want to go say something?
Yes, hi Alan. I just typed in the chat box. I will connect you with my partner Ismahan. She's in educational technology, so she knows a lot about Toby, and
Terrific.
she will have a recommendation.
Right. The other thing that I was interested in, and maybe we can save this for another time. I don't have any expertise, but I was at a conference in Pittsburgh just before COVID, and I happened to cross some students in speech language pathology, and we began talking about eye movements and their involvement with eye movement assistive technology, which I think is fascinating. So. And so I began wondering what equipment they're using and how they're using the software. It just might be instructive for us to know a little bit more about what's going on in different arenas when it comes to eye movements. So,
I jump in about the iLink 2 that I used, which was head mounted, and I wondered about how young a child has read with a head mounted, because there are certain advantages about the camera being close by and easy, and being able to use different eyes, but it can present a lot of data. And I don't know about, the difficulty of the mounting the head versus it's so easy. Although it's very difficult with writing because the hand gets in the way. And often with reading, the hand gets in the way when the camera is distant. Sorry.
Thank you, everyone. So thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Just
Go ahead,
mention
Yang.
it quickly. Yeah, my partner Ismahan, she used the Toby eye tracker. It's a small bar attached to the monitor, and she worked with 4-year-old kids. The kids barely noticed the eye tracker, so it worked very well for her. So just want to mention that. I don't think Ismahan had experience using the
Right.
whatever you call that.
Good.
Just want to let you know.
Thank
Do
you.
you know what analysis software is being used with the Toby?
I know it's within Toby.
Yeah, I think Toby has
I
its
can
own
access
built-in.
Proprietary
Yes.
software, yeah.
Okay. This is great. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Ryan and Peter for.
Say it.
But go ahead, Alan.
If people are interested, this is being recorded. As soon as it renders, I'll upload it to YouTube and send everybody a link in case they want to share this with their students.
That will be great. Thank you. That will be great, Alan.
So marvelous to see everybody.
I love you.
Absolutely. Stay safe, everybody.
And love the cat, Lori.
Lewis is photobombing.
Thank you all.
Recording stopped.
Bye-bye.